The search for quiet is a funny thing. You spend the first half of your life chasing noise ambition, promotions, the vibrant chaos of a growing family, and then one day you wake up and all you want is the gentle hum of a refrigerator and the sound of wind in the trees. After 30 years of teaching history, of trying to make the clamor of the past audible to the present, I was done with noise. My wife, Evelyn, after a career far louder and more demanding than mine, was even more so. We wanted our final chapter to be a quiet one, written in a place where the loudest sound was the morning birdsong. We found that place in the Palisades, a community of stately, older homes nestled among rolling hills and ancient oak trees. Our house was perfect, a graceful brick colonial with a sprawling garden that backed onto a quiet, wooded ravine. It was the kind of house that felt permanent, a place to grow old in, a sanctuary. We spent the first month in a state of blissful peace, unpacking books, planning the garden, and simply sitting on the back patio, listening to the profound, healing silence. The silence was broken by a woman who moved with the sharp, aggressive energy of a hornet. She appeared at our front door one afternoon, unannounced. She was a woman in her late 50s, rail-thin and impeccably dressed, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed hair and a face set in a permanent expression of mild disapproval. Her lips were a thin, bloodless line. "I am Meredith Finch," she announced, her voice as crisp and brittle as autumn leaves. She didn't introduce herself as a neighbor, but as a title. "I am the president of the Palisades Homeowners Association." "It's a pleasure to meet you," my wife, Evelyn, said, her voice warm and calm. Evie had a stillness about her, a deep, unshakable core of composure that had always been her defining characteristic. Where I was prone to intellectual anxiety, she was a creature of profound and solid presence. "I'm Evelyn Hayes, and this is my husband, David." Meredith Finch's eyes swept over Evie, then me, then proceeded to conduct a critical inspection of our front porch. Her gaze snagged on the newly installed flagpole bracket next to our door. We had planned to fly the American flag, a simple, quiet statement of the life of service Evie had led. "I'm here about the unapproved structural addition," Meredith said, her thin lips barely moving. She pointed a manicured finger at the bracket. I blinked. "It's a flagpole holder," I said. "It is a fixture affixed to the exterior facade of the dwelling," she corrected, as if reciting a legal text. "As per the Palisades Architectural Covenant, Article 7, Section C, Subsection 2, all such additions must be submitted for review and approved in writing by the Architectural Review Committee prior to installation. This," she gestured at the offending bracket, "is a violation." "It's for the flag," Evie said, her voice still calm, but with a new, cooler note of clarity. "Are you suggesting we need the committee's permission to fly the American flag?" Meredith's jaw tightened. "The covenant is clear. The flagpole is the issue, not the flag, though I will remind you that Section E of the same article restricts flag displays to federal holidays only. You will receive a formal notice of violation. You have 10 days to remove the unapproved fixture, or a fine of $100 per day will be levied against your property." She didn't wait for a response. She simply turned, her back ramrod straight, and marched down our walkway to a waiting sedan. We stood in the doorway, the pleasant afternoon air suddenly feeling heavy. I felt a familiar surge of frustration and anger. Evie, however, was perfectly still. Her eyes narrowed in a way I knew well. It was not an expression of anger. It was one of analysis. She was watching Meredith's car disappear down the street with the same focused, calculating intensity she might use to watch a storm gathering on a distant horizon. Well, I sighed, running a hand through my hair. So much for quiet. All systems have rules of engagement. David, Evie said, her voice a quiet murmur. She turned to me, a thoughtful, almost academic curiosity in her eyes. This one's just seem poorly calibrated. The first step is to understand the adversary's tactical objectives. I looked at my wife, a woman who could discuss a dispute over a flagpole with the dispassionate language of a military strategist, and I felt a familiar sense of awe. Meredith Finch had just picked a fight with a quiet historian and his even quieter wife. She had no idea she had actually just declared war on a strategist with a lifetime of experience in handling petty tyrants and poorly calibrated systems. The battle for the Palisades had begun. Our initial response to Meredith Finch's declaration of war was one of strategic patience. Evelyn, in her infinite and sometimes unnerving calm, insisted that we not react emotionally. She's probing our defenses. David, she explained one evening, as we looked at the official violation notice. A document filled with the kind of pompous, pseudo-legal jargon that only an HOA board could concoct. She expects us to get angry, to argue. That's a conventional response. We need to gather intelligence first. So, we complied, but only in the most precise, technically correct manner possible. We did not remove the flagpole bracket. Instead, Evie spent an afternoon drafting a formal request for architectural approval, a document so thoroughly researched and professionally presented it looked like a legal brief. She cited local and state ordinances regarding the display of the national flag, included the full specifications of the bracket, and respectfully requested the committee's review at their earliest convenience. We sent it via certified mail, creating a formal, undeniable paper trail. We were following the rules, her rules, but we were doing it with a meticulous precision that was, in itself, a form of defiance. Meredith's response was to escalate. The fines began to arrive like clockwork, each one a testament to her boundless pettiness. We received a $50 fine for our lawn being mowed in a non-standard diagonal pattern, when the bylaws apparently stipulated a traditional horizontal stripe. A $75 penalty was issued because the azalea bushes at the edge of our property were encroaching on the community scenic easement, a strip of land behind our house by a measured 3 inches. With each new notice, Evie's intelligence file grew. She purchased a large 3-ring binder and began to assemble what she called the Finch dossier. Every notice, every envelope, every piece of correspondence was placed in a clear plastic sleeve. She created a spreadsheet tracking the dates, the alleged violations, and the specific bylaws cited. Every action she takes provides a data point, she explained, her pen moving neatly across a ledger. See the pattern. The violations are becoming more subjective. Non-standard pattern. Improper aesthetic flow. She's moving from objective, measurable rules to subjective interpretations, which gives her more discretionary power. It's a classic authoritarian drift. Her language was so detached, so analytical, that it helped to calm my own rising anger. She was treating Meredith not as a personal nemesis, but as a hostile system to be analyzed, understood, and ultimately dismantled. During this time, Evie had a long phone call with an old friend of hers, a man named John Reynolds. I only overheard snippets of her side of the conversation as I passed her study, but the language was telling. "No, John, the retirement is wonderful," she said, a smile in her voice. "Just dealing with a bit of a local insurgency, a self-appointed commander with a poor grasp of strategic realities. Yes, asymmetric tactics, Mostly low-grade harassment. No, I'm not escalating. Not yet. I'm in an observation and documentation phase, letting the adversary reveal her capabilities and limitations. Of course, the rules of engagement are always paramount. I paused by the door, struck by the easy familiarity with which she used the language of conflict. Her study was a quiet, book-lined room, but on one shelf, almost hidden behind a stack of books on maritime law, was a single, framed photograph. It was of a much younger Evie, her hair pulled back severely, dressed in the crisp white uniform of a naval officer. She was on the deck of a massive aircraft carrier, shaking hands with a four-star general, the sea a vast blue expanse behind them. I had seen the photo 1,000 times, but in that moment, it seemed to carry a new and formidable weight. The fines were a nuisance, an irritation. But Meredith, failing to provoke the loud, angry confrontation she seemed to crave, soon decided that paper cuts were not enough. She needed to draw blood. The conflict was about to escalate from bureaucratic harassment to something far more personal and destructive. She was done sending notices. She was about to start sending a message. The transition from paper-based warfare to physical aggression was as cowardly as it was predictable. Meredith Finch, like all bullies, preferred to operate from a position of deniability. The attacks on our property were minor, almost trivial, but they were deeply personal and calculated to cause the maximum emotional distress. They were not acts of random vandalism. They were targeted strikes against the quiet life we were trying to build. The first casualty was the flagpole. One morning, I went out to get the newspaper and found the nylon halyard, which we had carefully threaded through the bracket in anticipation of eventual approval, had been severed. It was a clean, deliberate cut, made with a sharp blade. It was a small act, but the symbolism was potent. It was a direct, physical rejection of our simple desire to fly the flag, a petty act of desecration. Evelyn's reaction was unnervingly calm. She examined the cut rope with the focused eye of a forensic investigator. Single blade cut, no sawing motion, she observed, her voice quiet. Executed quickly, likely in the dark. This wasn't random. It was a message. She took a high-resolution photograph of the cut halyard with her phone. "Another entry for the dossier," she said, her voice devoid of any discernible anger. The next attack was more cruel. We had spent weeks lovingly tending to the rose bushes that my wife's mother had planted years ago, the only part of the original garden we had insisted on keeping. They were her pride and joy. One morning, we awoke to find the leaves on the most prominent bush turning a sickly, mottled yellow. Within 2 days, they were black and withered. The entire bush was dead. I was heartbroken and furious. Evie, however, knelt by the dead plant, her expression one of intense concentration. She took a soil sample from around the roots, placing it carefully in a small plastic bag. "Salt," she said, her voice a low, dangerous murmur. She poured a saline solution into the soil. It's an old, ugly trick. Kills the plant from the roots up, but leaves little immediate trace. Deniable, cruel. That evening, she took the soil sample to her study. She didn't have a full chemistry lab, of course, but over the years, she had assembled a collection of surprisingly sophisticated equipment for her various hobbies, which included botany and soil science. She spent an hour analyzing the sample, her face illuminated by the glow of a digital microscope. "The saline concentration is exceptionally high," she reported to me later, showing me a chart on her computer screen. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate, massive overdose. Whoever did this wanted to be absolutely certain the plant would die. It was at this point that we decided to install a security system. But Evie, characteristically, approached it not as a simple homeowner, but as a security professional. We didn't just order a consumer-grade system online. She spent days researching, eventually selecting a high-end, enterprise-level system with encrypted data storage and a secure, closed-loop network. When the security consultant came to the house, he was clearly impressed by her level of knowledge. "Ma'am," he said, after she had spent 20 minutes grilling him on the system's data encryption protocols and the legal requirements for establishing a clear chain of custody for the video evidence. "You seem to know more about this than I do. Have you done this before?" Evie gave him a small, enigmatic smile. "I've had some experience in asset protection," she said simply. We had the cameras installed, small, discreet domes tucked under the eaves of the house, their dark lenses silently watching. They were a necessary, but sad, addition to our home. Our sanctuary now had sentinels. The quiet of the place was now the quiet of a guarded perimeter. Meredith's attacks had failed to drive us out. They had failed to break Evie's composure. But they had succeeded in changing the very nature of our home, forcing us to harden a place that was meant to be soft. And her greatest miscalculation was this. She had no idea that her every petty, destructive act was now being recorded, documented, and analyzed by a woman who had spent a lifetime learning how to use an adversary's own actions to build an airtight case against them. Having failed to intimidate us with bureaucratic fines and covert vandalism, Meredith Finch opened a new front in her war, a campaign of public slander and social isolation. Her objective was to turn the community against us, to transform our quiet, private life into something suspicious and sinister in the eyes of our neighbors. Her weapon of choice was the Palisades online forum, a platform she commanded with an iron fist. The opening salvo was a masterclass in passive-aggressive poison. "It's so important that we all work to maintain the prestigious character of our community," she posted, accompanying it with a lovely photo of the neighborhood's manicured entrance. "That's why it's so disheartening when new residents move in who seem to think the rules don't apply to them. A refusal to comply with simple architectural standards, like those regarding flagpoles, shows a deep disrespect for the very fabric of our community and the values we all share." The implication was clear, and her acolytes in the comments section were quick to sharpen the point. "Are you talking about the new people in the old Hayes house? So unpatriotic of them to make a fuss about the flag." One wrote, completely missing the irony. Another added, "They seem very aloof. They never come to the Friday social mixers. What are they hiding?" Evelyn watched this unfold with a kind of grim fascination. "She's controlling the narrative," she said, scrolling through the feed on her tablet. "It's a classic propaganda tactic. Define the enemy, associate them with negative values, disrespect, secrecy, elitism, and then isolate them from the herd. She's not just a bully, David. She has a solid, if amateur, grasp of psychological warfare." The online campaign grew more personal and more vicious. Meredith began to invent outright lies, seeding them in the forum and letting them fester. A post appeared warning residents to be wary of unvetted newcomers who might have questionable financial backgrounds. She was implying that we were somehow illegitimate, that we didn't belong in a prestigious community like the Palisades. "She's probing for weaknesses," Evie murmured. Her eyes narrowed as she read the latest attack. "She's trying to find a vulnerability she can exploit. Our finances, our past, our reputation. She's running an opposition research campaign." The digital slander had a tangible, chilling effect on our daily lives. The friendly waves from neighbors became hesitant, then stopped altogether. Conversations at the local market would fall silent when we entered. We were being ghosted by an entire community, judged and convicted in the online court of Meredith Finch's making. It was a deeply painful and isolating experience. I found myself growing angry and resentful. Evie, however, remained focused and analytical. Her Finch dossier grew, now containing a thick section of printed-out screenshots from the forum, each post and comment meticulously highlighted and annotated. "Look here," she said one evening, pointing to a series of posts. She uses the same 3 or 4 accounts to immediately agree with and amplify her own message. They're her key lieutenants. And here, she uses loaded language: safety, security, protecting our values to create a sense of external threat. Me and you. It's textbook. "It's infuriating, Evie," I said, pacing the study. "They're turning us into villains." "Only if we allow them to," she replied, her voice calm and steady as a ship's anchor. "We will not engage on her battlefield. David, we will not argue on her forum. We will continue to gather our intelligence, build our case, and choose our own time and place for the decisive engagement. Let her think she's winning the hearts and minds. We're preparing to win the war." Her confidence was a balm to my own frayed nerves. But as the campaign of slander continued, I could see a new hardness in her eyes. Meredith had attacked our home, our property. Now, she was attacking Evie's honor, her character. And I knew from a lifetime of loving her that there was no line she would not cross to defend that. Meredith thought she was fighting a quiet retiree. She had no idea she was slandering a woman who had commanded ships and held the lives of thousands in her hands. A woman for whom honor was not a concept, but a code. The decisive engagement, I realized, was getting closer. Meredith Finch, emboldened by her perceived success in isolating us socially, escalated her campaign to its next logical phase, the weaponization of civic authority. If she could not force us out through fines or shame, she would try to use the city's own regulatory bodies to declare us unfit, unsafe, or non-compliant. It was a classic tactic of the determined harasser to wrap a personal vendetta in the respectable cloak of a civic complaint. The first official visitor was a man from the city's code enforcement office. He arrived to investigate a formal complaint about an unpermitted permanent structure, which, of course, referred to our flagpole bracket. Evelyn met him at the door, her demeanor one of polite, professional courtesy. She invited him in, offered him coffee, and then presented him with her file on the matter. It contained a copy of our formal request for approval, the certified mail receipt proving the HOA had received it, and a printout of the HOA bylaw that stipulated a 30-day window for the committee to respond to a window that had closed 2 weeks prior. "As you can see, officer," Evie said, her tone respectful but firm, "we have followed the established procedure to the letter. The HOA, however, has failed to do so. Their lack of response, according to their own rules, constitutes a de facto approval." The officer, a man clearly accustomed to dealing with screaming, irrational homeowners, was taken aback by her calm, methodical presentation. He reviewed the documents, his eyebrows climbing higher with each page. "Well, he muttered. "Ma'am, you are absolutely correct. They don't have a leg to stand on. I'm dismissing this complaint. And frankly," he added, lowering his voice, "I'll be having a word with my supervisor about the Palisades HOA. We've had a spike in frivolous complaints from this address block lately. It's a waste of city resources." The next attack was more insidious. A complaint was filed with the city arborist, claiming that the magnificent 100-year-old oak tree in our front yard was diseased and in imminent danger of falling, and therefore had to be immediately and expensively removed. The tree was a landmark, the reason we had fallen in love with the house. The thought of losing it was devastating. The arborist, a serious woman with a deep love for her work, conducted a thorough examination of the tree. Evelyn stood with her, discussing root systems and canopy health with a surprising degree of knowledge. "This tree is perfectly healthy," the arborist declared, patting its massive trunk. "One of the finest specimens of Quercus alba in the county. To cut it down would be a crime." Her eyes narrowed. The complaint mentioned a large weeping cavity at the base. "There's no such thing." "I believe," Evelyn said quietly, "that the complaint was filed with malicious intent." As they stood there, the arborist glanced towards Evie's study window, and her eyes caught on the framed photograph on the shelf, the one of Evie in her crisp, white uniform. "Is that you?" the arborist asked, her voice filled with a new kind of awe. "On the carrier. My brother served in the Navy." "A long time ago," Evie said with a small smile. "Ma'am," the arborist said, her tone shifting entirely, "I am so sorry you've had to deal with this. I will make sure my report reflects the fraudulent nature of this complaint in the strongest possible terms." Meredith's attempts to use the system against us were failing spectacularly. She had intended to entangle us in a web of bureaucracy and official censure, but she had fatally underestimated her opponent. Evelyn wasn't just a quiet retiree. She was a woman who understood systems, regulations, and chains of command on a level Meredith couldn't possibly comprehend. She was meeting every official, not as a defensive homeowner, but as a peer, an expert in her own right. The walls were closing in on Meredith. Her authority was being questioned. Her tactics were being exposed, and her credibility with the very city officials she sought to manipulate was being shredded. A cornered predator is a dangerous one. Having failed to defeat us with 1,000 paper cuts, she was now preparing for a single, devastating, and potentially ruinous final blow. All of Meredith Finch's carefully laid plans had unraveled. Her campaign of fines, vandalism, slander, and official complaints had not only failed to dislodge us, but had actually strengthened our position. She had lost face. Her authority had been challenged and found wanting, and her vendetta was becoming transparent to the very officials she had tried to co-opt. Her frustration must have been curdling into a potent, toxic rage. Her final move, when it came, was not one of petty harassment. It was an act of breathtaking audacity, a financial shock and awe campaign designed to ruin us. She called an emergency meeting of the Palisades HOA. The summons arrived via certified mail, a thick, intimidating packet of documents. The stated purpose of the meeting was to discuss a critical and unforeseen structural issue that required an immediate and substantial special assessment from all homeowners. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a stuffy, wood-paneled room that felt more like a courtroom. Meredith sat at the head of a long table, flanked by her board of sycophants. She had the air of a hanging judge about to pass sentence. She had hired a slick, sharp-suited lawyer to sit beside her, a clear move to intimidate any potential dissenters. Meredith began the meeting with a grim, theatrical presentation. She spoke of catastrophic structural failures in the community's retaining walls, a series of low stone walls that lined the neighborhood's main road. She presented a thick, glossy report from an engineering firm I had never heard of, filled with terrifying diagrams of fissures and stress fractures. She showed us invoices from a construction company, also unfamiliar, with estimates for emergency reinforcement and reconstruction. Then, She delivered the final, stunning blow. Due to the critical and time-sensitive nature of these repairs, she announced, her voice ringing with false authority, the board has voted unanimously to approve an emergency special assessment. The total cost of the project is $11 million. This will be divided equally among the 20 homeowners of the Palisades. Your individual assessment, due in full within 60 days, is $550,000. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. $11 million, $550,000 per household. It was an insane, impossible figure. People began to stammer, to protest, their faces pale with shock. "This is outrageous. Meredith," one man shouted, "my house isn't even worth that much." Meredith's lawyer stood up. "The HOA covenants you all signed are legally binding," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "They grant the board the authority to levy special assessments for the maintenance of common areas. Failure to pay within the 60-day window will result in a lien being placed on your property, followed by foreclosure proceedings. There will be no exceptions." It was a declaration of financial warfare. This was her checkmate. She had found a way to attack us that had nothing to do with flagpoles or rose bushes. She was threatening to take our home, our life savings, everything we had worked for. She looked directly at Evelyn, a slow, triumphant smirk spreading across her face. The look was unmistakable. "I've won. Try to fight this." I felt a wave of nausea and panic wash over me. This was a level of attack I had never anticipated. It was ruinous. Evelyn, however, was a picture of absolute, preternatural calm. While others were shouting or slumping in their chairs in despair, she simply sat there, her hands folded neatly on the table in front of her. She had listened to the entire presentation without a single flicker of emotion. When the lawyer finished his threat, she raised her hand slightly. "Yes, Mrs. Hayes?" Meredith asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "Do you have a question?" "I do," Evelyn said, her voice quiet, but carrying with an authority that cut through the panicked noise in the room. "May I have a copy of the engineering report and the construction invoices?" Meredith's smirk widened. "Of course. Take a good, long look. You'll see everything is perfectly in order." She slid a thick folder across the table. Evelyn took it. She didn't open it. She simply tucked it under her arm and stood up. "Thank you, Meredith," she said, her voice still perfectly even. "Thank you for providing us with all the documentation we'll need. We will be reviewing this thoroughly." She turned and walked out of the room, me trailing in her wake like a small boat in the shadow of a battleship. The other homeowners stared after us, their faces a mixture of despair and confusion. They thought Evelyn's calm was a sign of shock, of defeat. I knew better. It was the calm of a commander who had just received the enemy's battle plans. Meredith had just made the fatal error of handing her entire strategy over to a master strategist. The war was not over. The main engagement was about to begin. The 60-day deadline on the $550,000 special assessment hung over the Palisades like a guillotine. A palpable sense of fear and despair settled over the neighborhood. We saw "for sale" signs spring up on 2 lawns. Homeowners clearly panicking, trying to escape before the financial axe fell. Meredith Finch, in the meantime, was a strutting peacock of triumph, posting daily countdowns on the community forum and sending out weekly payment reminders via menacingly worded letters. For our part, we were an island of intense, quiet activity. The Finch dossier was now the central focus of our lives. But Evelyn was no longer just gathering intelligence. She was actively prosecuting a case. Our study was transformed into a command center. This isn't an assessment, David, she explained to me on the first night, spreading the documents Meredith had given her across our dining room table. This is a coordinated act of fraud. Now we prove it. Her approach was systematic and utterly professional. She treated Meredith's fraudulent scheme like a hostile military operation, and she began to dismantle it, piece by piece. First, the engineering report. The firm listed here, Apex Structural Solutions, has a post office box for an address and a website that was created 3 weeks ago, Evie said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. There's no record of them with the state licensing board. She made a phone call, not to a local number, but to a contact in Washington, D.C. John, it's Evie, she said, her voice warm but all business. I need a favor. I have a report here I suspect is fraudulent. I need an expert opinion, off the record. Someone from the Army Corps of Engineers, if possible. I need to know just how fake this is. Next, the construction invoices. The company, Bedrock Contracting, shares a registered agent with 3 other shell corporations, all of which were dissolved after being sued for fraud. She reported a day later. She made another call. Judge Reynolds, good morning. It's Evelyn Hayes. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I have a rather delicate financial matter. I need a recommendation for the best forensic accountant you know, preferably someone with Justice Department experience. We're looking at a case of what appears to be significant, multi-level embezzlement. For 2 weeks, she worked relentlessly. Her network of contacts, cultivated over a 30-year career, was a thing of quiet, awesome power. She spoke with lawyers, engineers, accountants, and investigators, not as a victim asking for help, but as a colleague seeking professional consultation. They were people who knew her not as a quiet retiree, but as Commander Hayes, Captain Hayes, and ultimately, Admiral Hayes. They were people who understood the weight and authority of her name. Slowly, the full picture of Meredith's corruption came into focus. She had been systematically embezzling from the HOA's reserve funds for years, funding a lavish lifestyle through padded invoices and no-bid contracts with shell companies she secretly controlled. The retaining walls were a fiction, a desperate, grandiose scheme to generate a massive infusion of cash to cover the millions she had already stolen, before the yearly audit would have exposed her. The $550,000 assessment wasn't just an attack on us. It was her escape plan. On the 59th day, the day before the deadline, the confrontation came to us. A sleek black car pulled up to our curb. Meredith Finch emerged, dressed in a severe black suit, flanked by 2 large, thuggish-looking men who were clearly not process servers. She had also, we later learned, requested a police presence for a civil standby, a common tactic to use the police as an intimidation tool. A single police cruiser pulled up behind her car. Meredith marched up our walkway, a thick sheaf of papers in her hand. She was radiating an aura of absolute, final victory. Our neighbors, drawn by the commotion, began to peek out of their windows and doors. This was the moment of public humiliation she had engineered. "This is it, Evelyn," she said, her voice ringing with triumph as she stood on our front step. "This is a legally executed lien against your property. You failed to pay. The foreclosure process begins tomorrow. You have lost." A young police officer stepped forward, placing himself between Meredith and our front door. "Ma'am," he said to Meredith, "let's just keep this civil." He then turned to us, his expression professional but weary. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, I'm just here to keep the peace." He looked at me. Then his eyes moved to Evelyn. And then, something extraordinary happened. His professional demeanor dissolved. He blinked, then blinked again. His eyes widened, first in confusion, and then in a sudden dawning wave of utter, shocked recognition. His back, which had been relaxed, snapped ramrod straight, his shoulders squared. His hand flew up to his brow in a salute so sharp and precise, it seemed to cut the air. "Admiral Hayes," he stammered, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and profound respect. "Ma'am, Officer Miller, Naval Reserve. I served on the security detail at NAVJAG headquarters when you were the Deputy Judge Advocate General. I didn't recognize you, ma'am." The world seemed to stop. Meredith Finch's triumphant smirk froze, then melted into a slack-jawed mask of confusion. The two thugs beside her exchanged bewildered glances. The watching neighbors murmured, their whispers carrying on the wind. Evelyn, who had been standing in calm repose, shifted. The quiet retiree vanished, replaced by something else. Something I had only seen glimpses of before. The air around her seemed to change, to become charged with an invisible weight. She returned the officer's salute with a motion that was economical, powerful, and utterly commanding. "At ease, officer," she said, her voice the same quiet tone as always. But now it carried the unmistakable resonance of command. A voice accustomed to being obeyed without question. She then turned her gaze to Meredith Finch. It was not a look of anger. It was a look of cold, dispassionate judgment. The look a commander gives to a subordinate who has failed in the most catastrophic way imaginable. "Meredith," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "You have made a number of tactical errors, the greatest of which was providing me with all the evidence I needed to dismantle you." She gestured to the papers in Meredith's hand. "That lien is based on a fraudulent assessment, which constitutes extortion. The engineering report is a fabrication. The invoices are from a shell corporation you control. You used the U.S. Postal Service to mail these demands, which adds multiple counts of felony mail fraud to the list." As she spoke, another car, a dark, unmarked sedan, pulled silently to the curb. Two people, a man and a woman in conservative business suits, got out. "You see," Evelyn continued, her voice as calm as a surgeon's scalpel, "I took the liberty of forwarding your dossier to a few old colleagues. The Army Corps of Engineers was fascinated by your structural failures, and my friends in the FBI's white-collar crime division were particularly interested in your unique approach to accounting." The two suited figures walked calmly up the driveway. The man flashed a badge at the stunned police officer. "FBI," he said quietly. "We're here for Ms. Finch." Evelyn delivered the final blow. "You were right, Meredith," she said, her eyes boring into the now terrified woman. "I have no move left, because the game is already over. Checkmate." The aftermath was a swift and satisfying unraveling of Meredith Finch's corrupt little empire. The arrival of the FBI on our front lawn turned our quiet suburban street into a crime scene. Meredith, who had arrived as a conqueror, was led away in handcuffs, her face a pale, slack mask of utter disbelief. The carefully constructed world of power and intimidation she had built for herself had been dismantled in less than 5 minutes by a woman she had fatally underestimated. The federal investigation was a whirlwind. Armed with the meticulous forensic accounting report and the fraudulent engineering documents Evelyn had provided, the FBI unraveled years of embezzlement, fraud, and extortion. Meredith's shell corporations, her no-bid contracts, Her lavish spending of community funds, it was all laid bare. Faced with an ironclad federal case, she pleaded guilty. She was sentenced to 7 years in a federal prison and ordered to pay millions in restitution to the Palisades HOA. Her sharp suits and power lunches were replaced by a drab jumpsuit and a cafeteria tray. The Palisades community was thrown into chaos. But it was a cleansing chaos. The fraudulent $550,000 special assessment was immediately declared null and void. The HOA was placed into temporary receivership to sort out the financial wreckage Meredith had left behind. When the time came to elect a new board, the homeowners, now profoundly wary of unchecked power, chose a group of transparent, service-oriented residents. The story of the quiet woman in the brick colonial, who turned out to be a retired admiral, became the defining legend of the Palisades. We were no longer the reclusive, unfriendly newcomers. We were, much to my quiet amusement, local heroes. The respect from our neighbors was palpable, and with it came the privacy and peace we had sought all along. The flagpole bracket, the source of the initial, petty conflict, remains by our front door. After the new board was elected, their first official act was to pass a new bylaw, named the Hayes Resolution, which explicitly protected any resident's right to fly the American flag at any time. Now, on quiet mornings, I sit on the back patio with my coffee, and Evelyn joins me. We watch the flag ripple in the morning breeze, a simple splash of color against the blue sky. The silence is back, but it's different now. It's not a fragile, conditional quiet. It's a deep, resilient, and well-earned peace, secured by the calm, strategic mind of a woman who knows that the greatest power is not in making the most noise, but in knowing precisely when and how to command silence.